What would you do if your husband, gone for 20 years, sent a card revealing his secret life? I'm Mara, 64, from Pennsylvania, and on May 1, 2025, I got a card from Ellis. He vanished in 2005, leaving me in grief for decades. It said, "I never left. Look in the basement." What I found there exposed his betrayal with another woman. Watch this true infidelity story of lies and quiet justice unfold. It was the morning of May 1st, 2025. A day that started like any other in my quiet Pennsylvania suburb. Until I found it, a plain envelope on the floor, slipped under my front door. No return address, no stamp, just my name, handwritten in a slanted print I'd never forget. Mara. I'm Mara, 64 years old, a woman who'd lived with grief for 2 decades. I almost didn't notice the envelope. It blended in with the bills and circulars, but something about the handwriting stopped me cold. My hand hovered over it for a second, my heart already beating faster. I sat on the couch, the morning sun streaming through the windows. It should have warmed me, but I felt a chill. I opened the envelope slowly, like it might bite. Inside was a birthday card, generic, with watercolor flowers and soft blue script. "Wishing you peace and joy," it read. I hadn't known peace in years, but that wasn't what stole my breath. It was the handwriting inside. I knew it instantly, every loop, every line. Ellis used to write me little notes in my lunch, back when we were young, when love felt simple. "Don't forget to smile, come home safe, miss you already." I hadn't seen his writing in 20 years, not since he vanished in 2005. And there it was, staring up at me now. "Happy birthday, Mara. I never left. Look in the basement." The card slipped from my hand, fell to the carpet with a soft thud. I felt the blood drain from my face. I couldn't move, couldn't even blink. My mind raced in every direction at once. Ellis, my husband, gone since 2005. The police found his car abandoned by the river. His wallet, phone, wedding band, all left behind. Everything but him. They said it was likely suicide. The current was strong, they told me. Sometimes the bodies never recovered. We held a memorial, an empty coffin. Friends brought casseroles, whispered condolences. Silence filled the spaces between. I grieved him. I hated him. I forgave him. I grieved again. For 20 years, I tarried a million unanswered questions, each one a weight I couldn't shed. And now this. I picked up the card again, holding it like it might burn me. I turned it over, searching for more. No signature, no date. Nothing but that single sentence, written in a way only Ellis could write. I never left. My mouth felt dry. I stood slowly, walked to the hallway mirror, looked at myself. My reflection looked the same. Not older, not younger, just stunned. I whispered, "This has to be a prank." But who would prank me? I didn't keep close friends anymore. Brina, my daughter, lived across the country. No one else even remembered the anniversary of his disappearance. I opened the front door, looked up and down the street. No one. Just the breeze rustling the trees, a stray newspaper in the driveway. Who could have put it there? Who would? My heart pounded in my ears. I stared at the envelope again, then turned to face the hallway, the one that led to the basement. That basement had been a vault of silence for 20 years. I'd barely gone down there. Maybe swept it out once or twice a year. I didn't need storage space. I didn't need reminders. But now all I could think was, what did he mean? Look in the basement. Was it a metaphor? A threat? A cry for help? I didn't want to go down there. Not alone, not without answers. But I couldn't ignore it. Deep down, beneath the panic and shock, there was something else. Hope. Not the innocent, joyful kind. No. This hope had jagged edges. It made my stomach turn. But it was there all the same. I took a breath, grabbed the flashlight from the drawer, headed for the basement door. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob. Whatever I was about to find, one thing was certain. My story, the one I told myself for 20 years, was about to change. I never thought I'd be here, looking back on a life that felt so solid until it wasn't. I'm Mara, 64, from Pennsylvania. On May 1st, 2025, a card from my husband Ellis turned my world upside down. He'd vanished in 2005, leaving me to grieve for 20 years. But the words, "I never left, look in the basement," forced me to face the past, to remember the life we had, and the cracks I didn't see until it was too late. Back in 2004, if you'd asked me to describe my life, I would have called it ordinary, maybe even boring, but in the best way. I was 43, married for over 2 decades to Ellis Granger, a man who folded his socks with military precision, always left 2 sips of coffee in the pot, like it was some sacred ritual. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet Pennsylvania suburb, just far enough from the city to hear crickets at night. Ellis was a high school history teacher, beloved by his students for his bad puns, his obsession with presidential trivia. He never forgot to turn off the oven, always raked the leaves before the first frost. He didn't believe in replacing things until they fell apart. That included our 15-year-old dishwasher, and some might say our marriage. But we worked. We understood each other. We didn't fight, not the loud kind, anyway. We made decisions together, planned vacations around Brenna's school breaks, had routines, rituals, quiet jokes only we understood. I worked part-time at the local library back then. My world was small, but peaceful. Mornings started with Ellis reading the newspaper, me packing his lunch, turkey and Swiss, apple slices, a peanut butter cookie I knew he'd give to a student who needed one. Evenings were quieter, dinner, dishes, then sitting on the porch while he graded papers and I read mystery novels. Our daughter, Brenna, was in her 2nd year at college in Vermont, majoring in environmental science. She called twice a week, always with updates about composting or a protest or a professor she admired. I missed her terribly, but I was proud. Alice was too, though he showed it differently. He'd send her extra socks in the winter, mail articles clipped from the newspaper. "She'll know I'm thinking of her," he'd say. Looking back, there weren't fireworks in our marriage, but there was comfort. And comfort, after so many years together, felt like love. Every Friday night, we ordered from Sal's Pizza. We didn't even need to ask what the other wanted. Half mushroom and black olive for me, plain cheese for him. He'd pick the movie, usually spies or submarines. I'd fall asleep halfway through. He'd nudge me awake when the credits rolled. "You missed the best part," he'd say, like always. On Sundays, we'd walk to the farmer's market, hand in hand. He always carried the bags, even when I offered. We didn't talk about anything groundbreaking, weather, neighborhood gossip, whose kid was getting married. But I never felt bored. I felt safe, held. Like the world could change around us, but we'd stay the same. That's what made everything later so hard to believe. Because nothing felt broken. Not really. There were no slamming doors, no whispered phone calls in the night, no lipstick stains on collars. He was just there. Consistent, predictable, mine. When people talk about signs, they always ask, weren't there any hints? I've thought about that more times than I can count. Maybe there were. Maybe they were so small I missed them. Or maybe, and this haunts me, maybe he was everything he appeared to be, until he wasn't. The last birthday I spent with them was my 44th. He took me to a little diner outside of town. Nothing fancy, just pancakes and coffee, but he made sure they put a candle in my apple pie. The waitress sang off key and everyone clapped. Ellis squeezed my hand under the table. "You're still my favorite mystery," he said. I smiled at that. It was the kind of thing he said often, a little cheesy, a little cryptic. At the time, I thought he meant he surprised me, kept life interesting. Now I wonder if he meant something else entirely. But in that moment, I believed in us. I believed in our life, our story. I believed we'd face the future together. I never imagined that less than a year later, he'd be gone. The first red flag came quietly. No big fight, no dramatic confession, just a forgotten dinner. It was our 24th anniversary, September 12th, 2004. I'd circled it in red ink on the kitchen calendar months in advance. I'd made reservations at a small Italian restaurant in town, the one where we'd celebrated our 10th and 15th anniversaries. I put on the blue dress he once said made my eyes look like summer skies, even wore lipstick, something I hadn't bothered with in years. Ellis wasn't home when I got dressed. I figured he'd gone to pick up a gift, maybe stopped to grab flowers. I set my phone on the windowsill and waited. 6 o'clock passed, then 6:30. At 7, the restaurant called to confirm if we were coming. I tried calling Ellis, straight to voicemail. By 8, I was still sitting on the edge of our bed, in full makeup and heels, staring at the front door like it might open on its own. My heart wasn't racing. It wasn't panic I felt. It was confusion, a slow spreading ache in my chest. Ellis was many things, but he wasn't forgetful. He remembered birthdays, library due dates, when the milk expired. That was part of his charm. So how could he forget this? When he finally walked in at 9:15, he looked surprised to see me in my dress. "Oh," he said, pausing in the doorway. "You're still up." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I was trying to swallow the lump in my throat. "I had a meeting," he continued, taking off his jacket. "Parent trouble. The Williams kid's mother came in. She wouldn't leave. I lost track of time." No apology. Just that. As if that explained everything. I looked at him, really looked. His tie was loose, shirt slightly wrinkled, a coffee stain near the hem. He seemed exhausted, completely unaware of the disappointment sitting in front of him. "I made reservations," I finally said. "Our anniversary." He blinked. "That's today." That's when I felt something shift. Not between us, but inside me. Like a tiny thread had been pulled loose. Nothing snapped, nothing tore, but I felt it just the same. He walked into the kitchen, opened a fridge. "I can make us some eggs," he offered. I almost laughed. Eggs on our anniversary. Instead, I nodded slowly, went to the bathroom, locked the door, and cried quietly into a towel so he wouldn't hear. That was the beginning. The first crack in a foundation I thought was unbreakable, and it wouldn't be the last. It all started with that card on May 1st, 2025. Slipped under my door like a secret no one dared to speak. I'm Mara, 64, from Pennsylvania. For 20 years, I'd believed my husband Ellis was dead. Gone since 2005, vanished without a trace. The police found his car by the river, his wallet, phone, wedding band, all left behind. Everything but him. They said it was likely suicide. The current was strong, they told me. Sometimes the body's never recovered. I held a memorial, an empty coffin. Friends brought casseroles and whispered condolences. Silence filled the spaces between. I grieved him. I hated him. I forgave him. I grieved again. For 2 decades, I carried a million unanswered questions, each one a weight I couldn't shake. The first few weeks after he vanished were a blur. Questions, sympathy, casseroles. People I hadn't spoken to in years sent cards. Brenna, our daughter, flew in and stayed for a while. The neighbors mowed my lawn without asking. Church ladies dropped off tuna noodle bake, peach cobbler with handwritten prayers taped to the foil lids. But by the second month, the calls slowed. By the third, people stopped asking for updates. You'll get through this, they'd say. Or worse, maybe it's a blessing in disguise. No one says that out loud to a widow. But I wasn't a widow. Not technically. I was something else. Something harder to define. A wife with no husband. A life on pause. A question with no answer. I didn't have a funeral right away. For months, I refused to believe he was gone. My brain twisted logic into knots. Maybe he'd had a breakdown. Maybe he was in a hospital with amnesia. Maybe he'd run off and regretted it. Every time the phone rang, I thought it'd be him, explaining, apologizing, coming home. But the phone only brought bills, telemarketers, or worse, silence. Eventually, I gave in to the pressure. We held a memorial. No body, just a framed photo of Ellis from our last vacation in the Poconos, standing on a dock, waving, smiling, like nothing was wrong. I stood beside that picture, shook hands with people who told me how strong I was. I don't remember what I said. I just remember the weight of my black dress, how Brina gripped my hand so hard it left crescent marks on my skin. After the service, I went home, crawled into bed with all my clothes still on, stared at the ceiling fan, listened to it click, click, click as it turned, hypnotizing me into stillness. I stopped answering the door, stopped checking the mail, stopped going to the grocery store. My fridge filled with spoiled leftovers, expired yogurt. I survived on saltines, canned peaches, black tea. Sometimes I didn't eat at all. I let the garden go. Weeds grew wild, creeping over the stone path, the one we'd laid together years ago. I watched them swallow the flowers one by one from the kitchen window, too tired to stop them. At night, I'd sit in his chair by the fireplace, clutching one of his old sweatshirts, hoping it might still carry his scent. It didn't. It smelled like dust and fabric softener. Still, I held it. Sometimes I spoke to it, asked questions no one could answer. Why did you go? Did you hate me? Did I miss something? The house groaned and settled around me, like it had its own grief to bear. Worst of all was the basement. I avoided it like it was haunted. That door stayed shut for years. I told myself it was just storage, just clutter, just shadows. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling. Something lived down there. Not Ellis, not literally, but the version of him I could never reach. The answers, the truth. His absence filled that space like a fog. The one time I tried to go down, I only made it 3 steps. The air was too heavy, the silence too loud. I turned back, heart pounding. By the first anniversary of his disappearance, I hadn't stepped out of the house in weeks. My clothes hung off me. My reflection looked like a stranger, pale, tired, older than I remembered. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a single candle lit, poured myself a glass of wine, toasted the empty chair across from me. "Happy anniversary," I whispered. My voice cracked on the second word. Then I blew out the candle. For a moment, I considered blowing out everything else too. I didn't. Not because I was strong, but because I was too numb to move. I'd reached the bottom. And it wasn't fire or chaos or screaming. It was quiet. The kind of silence you can't fill with music or prayer or casseroles. The silence of knowing you were never really seen. And now there was no one left to see you. But that card on May 1st, 2025 broke the silence. "Happy birthday, Mara. I never left. Look in the basement." It haunted me for a day. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The words burned in my mind. I knew I had to face it. On May 2nd, 2025, at noon, I stood at the top of the basement stairs, flashlight in hand, trembling. The door loomed before me, a threshold I hadn't crossed in years. I didn't know what I'd find down there, but I knew I couldn't turn back. Not this time. I'd lived in the void for 20 years, carrying the weight of his absence. Now I needed answers, even if they broke me all over again. I turned the knob. The door creaked open, and I took the first step down. It was the afternoon of May 2, 2025. I stood at the bottom of the basement stairs. The air was stale, thick with dust and silence. I'm Mara, 64, from Pennsylvania. For 20 years, I'd believed my husband Ellis was dead, vanished in 2005, leaving me to grieve a lie. But a card I received the day before, on May 1, 2025, changed everything. "Happy birthday, Mara. I never left. Look in the basement." Those words had haunted me for a full day. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I knew I had to face whatever was down here. My flashlight beam skimmed over old furniture, draped in yellowing sheets, stacked boxes labeled Xmas and Brina's school stuff. Nothing had moved in years. The silence was deafening. But then I saw it. In the far corner near the furnace, a patch of wall that looked just slightly off, a bit cleaner, a little too smooth. I approached slowly, heart pounding in my throat. The flashlight flickered. I slapped it, muttered a curse, pointed it back at the wall. I reached out, ran my fingers along the paneling, felt the seam, a thin, barely visible crack. I pushed. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a soft pop, the panel gave way. A hidden door. My breath caught. Behind it was a narrow cavity, not big enough to be a room, but deep enough to hold something. I pulled out a dusty box. It was heavier than it looked. I sat on the cold concrete, the box in my lap. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside were files, letters, photographs. None of them were mine. There were photos of Ellis with unfamiliar people, a woman I didn't recognize, smiling beside him in a park, kissing his cheek at a beachside cafe. Her name was written on the back, Clara. Children, too, a boy and a girl. They looked to be about 8 or 10. The boy had Ellis's crooked smile. The girl had his eyes. There were letters signed Jonathan E. His middle name was Edward. Driver's licenses with his face but a different name, Jonathan Garrison. Receipts from places he'd never told me he'd been. Airline tickets to Minneapolis, a storage key. My stomach turned as I dug deeper. A love letter from Clara, dated 2006, just a year after he vanished. "I can't wait to build our life together, Jonathan," she wrote. "You've given me everything I ever dreamed of." Photos of them at a wedding, hers and his. Ellis in a suit, smiling brighter than he ever had with me. Clara in a white dress, radiant. They'd started sleeping together in 2004, before he disappeared. Hotel receipts from a town an hour away. Emails arranging secret meetups while I was at the library. He'd been planning this for years. While I packed his lunch, folded his socks, he was writing her letters, promising her a future. He didn't just leave me, he erased me. He started over without a word. Let me believe he was dead, while he built a new family, a new life. I sat there, the box shaking in my lap. He hadn't died. He hadn't disappeared into a river. He had chosen to walk away. Chosen her. Chosen to let me mourn a lie. For 20 years, I'd lived in the ruins of a story that wasn't even true. My tears burned this time, not from sadness, but from rage, from shame, from the hollow realization that I'd mourned a man who didn't deserve it. I thought back to the suspicions I'd had earlier. In April 2025, before the card arrived, I'd found little clues over the years. Bank slips stuffed inside old books in the basement, a note scribbled on a napkin in the language I couldn't understand. I'd started to wonder if Ellis was really gone. So I'd hired a private investigator, Denise. She was sharp, no nonsense, operating out of a modest office downtown. I'd given her the few clues I had, asked her to look into Ellis's disappearance. "I'll see what I can find," she'd said. That was a month ago. Now, with this box in my hands, I knew I'd been right to suspect. But the truth was worse than I'd imagined. I couldn't face him, not yet, not in person. I needed more than just this box. I needed to know where he was, who he'd become, how he lived while I suffered. I called Denise that evening, May 2nd, 2025. "I found something," I told her. "Photos, letters, fake IDs. He's alive, I know it. I need you to find him." She didn't ask unnecessary questions, just nodded through the phone. "I'll have something for you soon." That night, I sat in my kitchen, the box on the table in front of me. I didn't touch it again. I couldn't. Every time I passed it, I felt like it was breathing, waiting. I wasn't ready to open it again. It was mid-May 2025, 2 weeks after I'd uncovered the truth in that basement box. I'm Mara, 64, from Pennsylvania. For 20 years, I'd believed my husband Ellis was dead. Vanished in 2005, leaving me to grieve a ghost. But on May 1st, 2025, a card slipped under my door changed everything. "Happy birthday, Mara. I never left. Look in the basement." The next day, I found the proof. A hidden box, letters, photos, receipts. Ellis had betrayed me with Clara since 2004, built a new life in Minneapolis as Jonathan Garrison, a wife, 2 kids, a dog named Tank, while I mourned a lie. I'd hired a private investigator, Denise, back in April, before the card even arrived. I'd had suspicions for months, little things, bank slips I found in old books, a note in a language I couldn't read, tucked inside a box in the basement I'd avoided for years. I'd started piecing it together, but I needed proof. Denise was sharp, no nonsense. She'd been working on it for weeks. And on May 15th, 2025, she called. "I've got an address," she said, "and a name. Jonathan Garrison." She sent me a photo. Ellis, older, grayer, heavier, standing in his front yard in Minneapolis, smiling with Clara, their kids, their dog, like he'd never shattered my life. I didn't feel rage. Not anymore. I felt a quiet resolve. I wasn't the broken widowed I'd been for 20 years. I was done carrying his ghost. I'd sent him a letter after Denise's call. "I found the box. I know everything. Don't contact Brenna again. You may have left me, but I finally left you." He emailed back, begging to meet. "Please let me explain. I never meant to hurt you." But I didn't reply. I couldn't face him. Not in person. Not yet. Instead, I faced the truth in my own way. I sat in my garden that evening, May 16th, 2025. The lavender and rosemary swayed in the breeze. The sun dipped low, casting a golden glow. I held one of the photos from the box. Alice and Clara at a beachside cafe, her lips on his cheek, their smiles brighter than I'd ever seen with me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, letting the truth settle. He hadn't died. He hadn't been lost to a river. He'd chosen to leave. Chosen her. Chosen to let me believe he was gone. For 20 years, I'd lived in the shadow of his absence, questioning my worth, wondering what I'd done wrong. But now I knew. I hadn't failed him. He'd failed me. That realization was its own kind of justice. Not loud or explosive, but quiet, steady, unshakable. I wasn't the one who needed fixing. He was the coward, the liar, the weak one. And I was still here, still standing. I started taking steps, not for revenge, but for myself. I met with my lawyer, Judith, on May 20, 2025. Her office downtown was stark, all glass and steel. Her voice sharp, precise. She flipped through the folder I'd given her, filled with Ellis's fake IDs, bank records, rental agreements. "He never filed for divorce," she said. "In the eyes of the state, you're still his legal wife." I nodded, the words sinking in. "So he committed bigamy?" I asked. "Yes," she replied. "And more, tax fraud, identity misrepresentation. Possibly insurance fraud if he claimed benefits under his death." I didn't want a trial. I didn't want to drag his new family through the mud. His kids, Clara, they didn't deserve that. But I wanted the truth to be known. I wanted his lies to catch up to him. "So file a civil petition," I told her. "Void his second marriage. Expose his fraud. Let the truth do the rest." Judith nodded. By May 25, 2025, the petition was filed. Ellis, or Jonathan, received formal notice. His second marriage was stripped of legal status, his bank accounts flagged for review. His name entered a fraud registry. Quietly, without fanfare. The life he'd built on my grief began to crumble. But the real justice came in a letter. Not from Ellis, but from Clara. It arrived on May 28, 2025. Handwritten, cautious, respectful. "I don't know you, but I owe you an apology," she began. She explained how Ellis had confessed after the legal notice. She'd been devastated, not just by the lie, but by the betrayal, by how he'd left me to mourn while he built a life with her. "I found the files he kept hidden," she wrote. "I confronted him, and he admitted everything. I married a man I didn't truly know, and you lived a life wondering where he went. I am sorry for my part in that, even if it was unknowing. I've asked him to leave. The children and I will rebuild, just like you did. I hope one day your story brings you peace." I read the letter 3 times. Each time the weight in my chest lifted a little more. His lies had caught up with him, not through my anger, but through the truth. That was the justice I never knew I needed, not to destroy him, but to free myself. The next evening, May 30th, 2025, Brenna called. I was in the kitchen wiping down the counters. After baking a batch of lemon shortbread, I bake for myself now, no longer trying to please a ghost. My phone buzzed. Brenna's name lit up the screen. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, pressing it to my ear. Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Hi, Mom. You busy?" "Just finished baking," I replied, sensing something in her tone. "What's going on?" She paused, then said it. "I got a letter from Dad." I turned off the faucet, wiped my hands on a towel, sat at the kitchen table. "A letter?" I asked gently. "Yeah, just a couple pages, handwritten. No return address. He said he'd been following my life from afar. Hoped I'd forgive him. Said he never stopped loving me." I closed my eyes. His audacity still stung. "What did you think?" I asked carefully. She sighed. I didn't reply. "I don't think I will. I'm just confused. He wants forgiveness, but not a relationship. He says he's sorry, but doesn't explain why he left." "That sounds about right," I said softly. There was silence on the line. Then she asked something I hadn't expected. "Did you ever think he'd come back?" I thought about it, not in terms of hope. That had died long ago, but in terms of expectation. Whether I'd believed Ellis would one day appear, knock on the door, say he'd made a mistake. I used to, I admitted. For years, I imagined the doorbell ringing, him standing there with tears and apologies. Some story about losing his mind. I wrote entire conversations in my head. They never happened. Then I realized I didn't want him to come back. "Why not?" she asked. "Because I started liking the woman I was becoming without him." Brenna was quiet. I could hear the weight of that settling over her. "I always wondered what you weren't telling me," she said. "When I was younger, I thought it was too painful to talk about. But I get it now. You were protecting me from the ugly truth." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "I didn't want you to carry his absence like a burden. I wanted you to live freely, not chasing a shadow or resenting him. He made his choice. I didn't want it to steal your joy." Her voice cracked. "You never said anything bad about him." "I know," I said, "but that doesn't mean I thought good things." She gave a half laugh. "You're stronger than I realized, Mom." "No," I said, "I'm just no longer afraid of the truth." We talked for another hour. About her work, her dog, her book club drama. Mother and daughter, comfortable and whole. That night I knew I'd taken the first steps to heal. It's May 31st, 2025, at 4:31 p.m. I'm standing at the top of the basement stairs, looking down into the space that once held my deepest fears. I'm Mara, 64, from Pennsylvania. For 20 years, I lived with the ghost of my husband, Ellis, believing he died in 2005. Until a card on May 1st, 2025 changed everything. Happy birthday, Mara. I never left. Look in the basement. What I found there unveiled his betrayal. A secret life with Clara, a family in Minneapolis. While I mourned a lie. That discovery set me on a path I never expected. The basement isn't a place of shadows anymore. I cleaned it out weeks ago, after finding the box on May 2nd, 2025. I turned the corner with the hidden door into a reading nook. An old armchair, a lamp, a woven rug. Nothing fancy, just mine. I sit there now, a cup of peppermint tea in my hands. A soft rain taps on the small window above. The musty scent is gone, replaced by lavender sachets and fresh paint. I think about the woman I used to be, the one who stood in this space with shaking hands, a box of betrayal in her lap. She lived in mourning, not just for a man, but for a version of her life that never existed. I mourn her now, not with sadness, but with respect, because she survived. She didn't just endure the silence, she built a new voice inside it. I used to think closure meant answers, a confession, a perfect ending. But now I know better. Closure is a choice. It's walking through the door that broke you and realizing it no longer holds power. I spent years in half-light, tiptoeing around grief, waiting for something that would never return. Ellis wrote his own exit, thinking he could leave without consequence. But the truth has a way of surfacing, not with drama, but with certainty. And once it arrives, there's no room for shame. No room for denial. It just is. I no longer carry questions like chains. Where did he go? Why did he leave? What did I do wrong? Those questions were my companions. Now they're ghosts that don't know they're dead. I think about Brina's voice on the phone last night, May 30th, 2025. Filled with cautious concern, then quiet admiration. She saw me for the first time, not just as mom, the constant, the comforter, but as a woman who'd lost, broken, rebuilt, and kept going. That's what matters in the end. Not the fall, but the rising. I reach into my pocket, pull out the card that started it all. It's creased now, edges worn. I opened it too many times. I stand, walk to the small electric fireplace I installed last month, turn it on, watch the soft flames flicker. I place the card into the fire. It curls quickly, blackens at the edges. The words, "I never left, look in the basement," turn to ash. He was right in a way. He never really left, because I carried his absence for years. But now I let him go. Not for him, for me. The ashes drift upward and vanish. I smile. I'm sharing this story now at 04:31 p.m. on May 31st, 2025, to tell you you're never alone. Betrayal can break you, but it doesn't define you. Subscribe to Yanyo's Cheating Stories for more. Drop a comment. Have you faced a betrayal like this? I'd love to hear your stories. Hit that bell, and I'll see you soon.